They say blood is thicker than water, but no one ever mentions what happens when that blood slowly drains you dry, drop by precious drop, until you're nothing but a hollow shell of who you used to be. I should have known something was wrong when Bethany kept glancing at me throughout dinner, her eyes sharp with that familiar mixture of disdain and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was anticipation. The kind a cat has right before it pounces on a wounded bird. The evening started beautifully enough. I had spent 3 days preparing for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary party, my hands working tirelessly to create the perfect rose cake, each sugar petal meticulously crafted by hand. The dining room was filled with the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off the good china, and the air was thick with the scent of the anniversary bouquet I had arranged that morning. Neighbors and family friends filled every seat, their laughter mixing with the gentle clink of wine glasses. I was placing the cake on the table, my heart swelling with quiet satisfaction at the gasps of admiration from the guests, when Bethany suddenly stood up. She held her wine glass high, and the room gradually fell silent, all eyes turning toward my younger sister. "I want to raise a toast to Mom and Dad," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the room. I smiled, thinking this was a sweet gesture from my often self-centered sister. "And I also want to say goodbye to a burden that we no longer want to carry." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the color drain from my face as every eye in the room shifted to me. Bethany's gaze was ice cold as she continued, her voice steady and cruel. "Eleanor, you've been enough. You're holding all of us back. This family wants to live without you." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes boring into me. Dad gripped his wineglass so tightly I thought it might shatter, but he said nothing. Mom buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances, some looking down at their plates, others whispering behind their hands. I managed to force a smile, though it felt like my face might crack from the effort. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like they might give out beneath me, and walked out of that house without saying a word. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices starting up again, but I didn't turn back to look at the beautiful cake I had made, now abandoned on the table like everything else I had ever given to this family. As I drove aimlessly through the night, tears streaming down my face, my mind kept circling back to that moment 5 years ago when everything had started to unravel. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Dad called, his voice heavy with worry. Mom's medical bills had mounted up, and the house needed extensive repairs after the storm damage. The family was drowning in debt, and they needed help desperately. I didn't hesitate for even a second. Petals and Stems, my flower shop, was thriving at the time. I had built it from nothing, working 18-hour days, carefully nurturing relationships with wedding planners and event coordinators. It was my pride and joy, my independence made manifest in every carefully arranged bouquet and every satisfied customer's smile. But family came first. It always had for me. I sold the shop for $150,000, every penny of which went straight to paying off the family's debts. "It's just temporary," I told myself as I signed the papers, watching my dreams disappear in black ink, just until they get back on their feet. That temporary arrangement had lasted 5 years. 5 years of me working part-time at a local nursery, earning half of what I used to make, while sending nearly $2,000 a month to cover the family's electricity, water, internet, insurance, property taxes, and home maintenance. 5 years of Bethany calling me a leech and a failure while I paid for the internet she used for her freelance work and the electricity that powered the computer she worked on. 5 years of watching my parents say nothing when Bethany berated me, when she called me worthless and pathetic, when she suggested I was the reason the family couldn't get ahead. They would sit there, silent as stones, while their younger daughter tore their older daughter to pieces with her words. Now, sitting in a dingy motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams, I finally understood what Bethany had meant. They really did want to live without me. They wanted my money, my support, my sacrifices, but they didn't want me. The next morning, I called the only people I knew would understand. Thomas and Laura had been my closest friends before I had retreated into the suffocating embrace of family obligation, and they welcomed me into their warm, comfortable home without a single question. Thomas was a sharp-minded lawyer with kind eyes, and Laura was a financial analyst with a gift for seeing through people's pretenses. "Eleanor," Thomas said after I had finished telling them everything, his voice gentle but firm, "it's time you stopped being their umbrella and let them feel the rain for themselves." Laura nodded, pulling out her laptop. "Let's see how much they really want to live without you," she said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I want to show you exactly what your absence will cost them." As we went through the numbers, the reality of my situation became crystal clear. I was essentially paying for an entire household of adults to live comfortable lives while I scraped by on part-time wages. Thomas told me about a colleague of his, Edward Hayes, who had cut off financial support to his adult daughter after years of emotional abuse. Sometimes people need to feel the full weight of responsibility before they understand what they've been taking for granted, he said. That evening, I sat in Thomas and Laura's guest room with my laptop open, staring at the list of automatic payments that had defined my life for the past 5 years. Each click of the cancel button felt like lifting a weight off my shoulders. Electric bill, canceled. Water bill, canceled. Internet, streaming services, home insurance, property taxes, all of it, canceled. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could breathe. The calls started 3 days later. My phone buzzed incessantly, but I let most of them go to voicemail. When I finally answered, it was Bethany's voice, shrill with panic. "What the hell did you do, Eleanor? The internet's out, I can't submit my freelance work. The electricity bill is overdue. Mom's having a complete breakdown. Turn everything back on right now." "You said you wanted to live without me, Bethany," I replied, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "This is what that looks like." She hung up with a sharp laugh. "Typical, you're so sensitive. No one actually wants you around." Mom called next, her voice a mixture of pleading and accusation. "Sweetheart, please, the house is falling apart. Dad can't work without internet. Bethany's lost income. We need you." "Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. "When Bethany called me a burden, you said nothing. I'm giving her exactly what she asked for." "But we're family," Mom protested. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've let her treat me," I replied, and hung up. 2 weeks later, Laura showed me the pictures that Diane, our old neighbor, had sent. The once pristine lawn was overgrown with weeds, newspapers, and bills overflowed from the mailbox, and the house looked like it was slowly crumbling. Dad couldn't find work without reliable internet, and Bethany was struggling with multiple part-time jobs that barely covered her own expenses, let alone the household bills. The rumors started spreading through the neighborhood. Diane texted me regularly with updates, her messages filled with barely concealed curiosity about the family's sudden decline. "Your family's house looks terrible. What happened?" she wrote. I didn't reply. When Mom called Laura directly, begging for help because I wouldn't answer my phone, I listened to the voicemail with a heavy heart. "The bank is taking action." Mom sobbed into the phone. "They're going to take the house. Please, help us." But I had already helped them. I had given them 5 years of my life, my business, my dreams, my financial security. And when I had needed them to defend me, to show me even basic respect, they had chosen silence. The breaking point came when Mom appeared at Thomas and Laura's front door, looking thin and desperate. Her hands shook as she knocked, and when I opened the door, I barely recognized the woman who had raised me. "Eleanor, the bank is foreclosing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bethany's working night shifts, but it's not enough. Your father can't find steady work. We're drowning." I invited her in, my heart aching at the sight of her distress, but I didn't waver. "Mom, for 5 years I carried this family. I gave up everything I had worked for. And when Bethany called me worthless, when she said you all wanted to live without me, you sat there and said nothing." Mom broke down then, tears streaming down her face. "I thought family meant more to you than this," she whispered. "Family should have meant more to you," I replied. She left without another word, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. A week later, Laura came into the living room where I was reading, her face pale with shock. "Eleanor, I just heard from a friend at the bank. They're proceeding with foreclosure on your parents' house." I dropped my coffee mug, the ceramic shattering against the hardwood floor, pieces scattering like the remnants of my old life. The house I had sacrificed everything to save was going to be lost anyway. All those years, all that money, all those dreams, and it had all been for nothing. But strangely, along with the pain, I felt something else, relief. They couldn't ask me to save it again. I wouldn't let them. The day of the foreclosure hearing, I sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching my family's world crumble. Bethany sat with her arms crossed, her hair unwashed and her usual polished appearance replaced by the look of someone who had been working too many shifts for too little pay. Mom clutched a tissue in her hands, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Dad stared straight ahead, his jaw set in a hard line. When the judge read out Robert and Sarah Vance, foreclosure proceedings to commence, Bethany spotted me in the back. She elbowed Dad hard in the ribs, her eyes filled with fury. "She's here to gloat," she hissed, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "No, Your Honor, I'm here to set the record straight." I had brought a thick folder of documents with me. Bank statements, transfer records, receipts for every bill I had paid for the past 5 years. "I didn't abandon them," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "They abandoned me." The evidence was undeniable. Page after page of payments, all from my account, all keeping that family afloat while they treated me like a burden they couldn't wait to be rid of. When I finished speaking, the courtroom was silent except for Mom's quiet sobs. "You ungrateful bitch." Dad exploded, jumping to his feet. "You'll regret humiliating us like this." "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I regret letting you take advantage of me for so long." The judge proceeded with the foreclosure. As we left the courtroom, Dad tried to get in my face, but security stepped in. Bethany slumped in her chair, her phone clattering to the floor, the screen cracking in a spiderweb of broken glass. "Eleanor, please," Mom whispered as the officers escorted Dad away. "We have nowhere to go." "You made your choice," I said. "Now live with it." 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in Austin, watching the city lights twinkle like stars fall into earth. It was a small place, but it was mine, paid for with my own money from the job I had found at a high-end florist downtown. I had reopened a flower shop, too, something I thought I would never be able to do again. Eleanor's blooms was smaller than petals and stems had been, but it was more focused, more artistic. I specialized in unique arrangements and taught flower arranging classes to anyone who wanted to learn. The work brought me a peace I had forgotten was possible. Through the neighborhood gossip network that somehow reached even to Austin, I heard updates about my former family. The house had been sold at auction for a fraction of what it was worth. Bethany was working multiple jobs, living in a tiny studio apartment, her social media presence reduced to almost nothing. Dad picked up odd jobs here and there, constantly complaining about the neighbors' whispered comments. Mom called occasionally, but I never answered. The vindication came unexpectedly at a flower show in downtown Austin. I had created a massive rose installation, a tribute to resilience and rebirth, and it had caught the attention of several high-profile wedding planners and interior designers. As I was being interviewed by a local magazine, I caught sight of a familiar figure in a server's uniform, carrying a tray of champagne glasses. Bethany looked tired, older than her 30 years, her hands rough from manual labor. When she saw me standing in the spotlight, being photographed and celebrated, something crumbled in her face. For just a moment, I saw past the years of cruelty to the little sister who had always been jealous, always competing, always trying to prove she was worth more than me. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't need to. My success, my happiness, my freedom spoke louder than any words ever could. That night, I sat on my balcony again, looking out over the city that had become my sanctuary. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who had believed that love meant endless sacrifice, that family meant accepting abuse in silence. That woman was gone, and in her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't value you. I had never been a burden. I had been a pillar, holding up a structure that was determined to collapse, and walking away wasn't betrayal, it was survival. The rose installation in my shop caught the morning light, each petal perfect and whole, beautiful not in spite of the thorns that protected it, but because of them. I had learned to grow my own thorns, and finally, I was free to bloom.